Is that Yasmin? Graham Whitmore froze beside his silver Bentley, disbelief etched across his face as he stared at the woman behind a faded lemonade stand. His first love, selling drinks on the same corner where everything began. If you're watching this, where are you tuning in from? And what did you think this story was going to be? Another cold billionaire tale? Think again. In this gripping, unexpected reunion, a powerful CEO risks everything when past and present collide most tenderly and explosively. A childhood promise, a broken love, in a corner that never forgot. This isn't just a romance, it's a reckoning. Stick around as we unfold a story filled with betrayal, redemption, and second chances that defy status and time. If you're captivated already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt narratives like this, and drop us a comment letting us know where you're watching from. This is one moment you won't want to miss. The sun hung heavy above Atlanta's skyline, its light bouncing off glass towers and high-end convertibles that ruled the avenues like mechanical kings. Graham Whitmore adjusted the cuffs of his crisp white shirt as he stepped out of his car, a gleaming silver Bentley that drew gazes even in this wealthy district. He barely noticed the heat, barely noticed the assistant jogging after him with a portfolio full of documents that needed signing before noon. His mind was already elsewhere, pulled away from contracts and boardrooms by something far more gripping than a billion-dollar merger. What caught his eye wasn't another skyscraper or a competitor's billboard. It was a small, weathered stand on a familiar corner, draped in yellow cloth and crowned with a handwritten sign that read, Yasmin's Lemonade, best in town. For a moment, Graham thought he was hallucinating. His footsteps slowed, eyes narrowing through the tinted lenses of his sunglasses, as if squinting might erase what he was seeing. But there she was, Yasmin Carter, her dark curls pinned back, her hands busy pouring ice into a plastic cup, her laugh rising over the city noise like a note from a half-remembered song. It had been 15 years since he last saw her, since the night he left without goodbye, pushed by a family too rich to accept a girl too real. And yet time had been gentle on her. Her smile, though maybe a touch more guarded, was unmistakably hers. The corner, too, hadn't changed. The same cracked sidewalk, the same mural fading on the brick wall behind her. It was the past resurrected, except this time, he wasn't a teenager on a bike. He was the CEO of Whitmore Properties, a man who owned half the developments within 10 miles of this spot. "Sir, we're going to be late for the Sterling call," his assistant reminded him breathlessly, snapping him from the trance. Graham didn't answer. He just stood there, hands still resting on the car door, watching Yasmin hand a cup of lemonade to a little boy in a Braves cap. The boy grinned, took a sip, and shouted, "Whoa, this is awesome!" Yasmin smiled, ruffled the boy's hair, and returned to wiping the condensation from her table. Graham felt something stir in his chest, something dangerously close to regret. That was the corner where they'd shared their first kiss, the sidewalk where she used to wait for him after his prep school classes. It wasn't just a stand, it was their corner. He crossed the street slowly, like approaching a flame that might flicker and vanish. Yasmin hadn't seen him yet. She was focused on her small cooler, lifting another jug of lemon-infused water. Her movements were calm, practiced, the way someone moves when they've repeated the same ritual for years. Graham felt suddenly awkward in his tailored suit, like an imposter in a world that had stayed real while he drifted too far into boardrooms and wine cellars. He took a breath, and the air smelled like lemons and memory. $2, she said to a passing couple, handing over 2 paper cups without looking up. Her voice hit him like a chord he hadn't heard in forever. It wasn't that she hadn't changed. She had. There were faint lines around her eyes, a tiredness in her shoulders. But it was the kind of change that spoke of living, not losing. He realized he was standing there too long when a man behind him cleared his throat to get past. He stepped forward, finally close enough to speak, and said, "Your sign still needs work." Yasmin looked up, her face registering confusion for a split second before freezing in place. The world seemed to hush. The traffic noise, the sidewalk chatter, even the hum of the city faded into a low thrum as their eyes locked. She blinked once, slowly, then said, "You've got to be kidding me." He smiled softly, cautiously, watching every flicker of emotion move across her face. Shock, disbelief, a flicker of anger, and then a mask slipping over it all, like a curtain pulled tight. "I was just in the neighborhood," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Yasmin gave a small, incredulous laugh, not the warm kind. "Right, because Graham Whitmore, Atlanta's golden boy, just casually strolls past this corner after 15 years of forgetting it existed." She poured lemonade into a cup, motioning toward it. "Still sweet, still cold, still not for sale, in case you're wondering." He didn't take the cup. "Not yet." "I wasn't expecting to see you here," he said, shifting his weight. "I thought you moved." Yasmin shrugged, wiping her hands on a towel. "I did. And then I moved back. Some of us don't get to fly off to Harvard and buy the city, Graham. Some of us stay and make something real." Her words cut, but they weren't cruel, just honest. He nodded, accepting the sting. "You always made the best lemonade," he said. She finally looked at him, really looked. Her gaze wasn't soft, but it wasn't cold either, just heavy with the weight of time and the pain of things unsaid. "Why now?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then replied, "Because I saw a corner I used to love, and someone I never stopped missing." Yasmin shook her head, half turning away. "That corner doesn't belong to you anymore, Graham. It hasn't in a long time." But her hands trembled just slightly as she picked up a fresh stack of cups. He reached into his wallet and pulled out $100 bill, placing it gently on the counter. "Then let me buy a memory." Yasmin stared at the bill, then at him. "Your money's no good here," she said. "It never was." Graham stepped back, unsure whether her words meant goodbye or something far more complicated. But as he walked away, cup of lemonade finally in hand, he tasted the same tangy sweetness that had once made him believe love could survive anything. He wasn't sure what came next, but he knew one thing for certain. That corner wasn't done with them yet. The lemonade still clung to his tongue, sweet, sharp, honest, as Graham stood a few feet away from the stand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Yasmin had turned her back to him, but not before her eyes gave her away. There had been a flicker there, small but unmistakable. Recognition, maybe even pain. He didn't expect forgiveness, not after the silence he'd left her in, but he also hadn't expected to feel like a stranger in a place that once felt like home. He was about to say something more, maybe ask her to have coffee, when a voice, cool and unbothered, cut through the air like the edge of a blade. "Mom, who is this?" The girl was tall and lean, her skin the same rich tone as Yasmin's, but with sharper features and youth in every angle of her posture. She stood next to the lemonade stand, arms crossed, eyes locked onto Graham with open suspicion. There was a flicker of protectiveness in her stance, like a guard dog sensing a threat. Yasmin's shoulders stiffened, but her hands kept wiping down the surface of the stand with a rhythm that seemed more like habit than need. "This is Graham Whitmore," she said finally, her voice neutral. "We used to know each other." The girl didn't flinch. She just stared. "Used to how?" Graham stepped forward slightly, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We were friends," he said, carefully choosing the word, as if the truth might ignite something neither of them was ready for. "A long time ago." The girl raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Friends don't disappear for 15 years, she said. "Friends don't leave and come back with designer suits and expensive cars and pretend like nothing happened." Yasmin shot her daughter a look, firm but not scolding, then sighed. "Layla, this is not the time." But the girl, Layla, wasn't done. "No, Mom. I want to know why the guy from all your sad songs and late-night tears is standing here like he belongs." The silence that followed stretched long, pulling at the edges of the air around them. Graham didn't move. He knew this wasn't his moment to speak. Yasmin finally set down her cloth, took a breath, and faced her daughter. "Because sometimes the past shows up whether we invite it or not," she said, "and when it does, we face it, not run from it." Layla didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. She kept her eyes on Graham like she was trying to read every lie he hadn't yet told. "I didn't know you had a daughter," Graham said quietly, though it was obvious now. Layla looked to be about 17. Yasmin nodded. "You wouldn't. You weren't around for the hard years." There was no bitterness in her tone, just fact, like she'd said it to herself 100 times before. Graham opened his mouth to speak, but Yasmin cut him off. Don't ask questions you're not ready to hear answers to, Graham. Not yet. He nodded, stepping back again, the weight of old choices pressing heavy against his chest. Then came the sound of heels against pavement, sharp, precise, and unmistakably familiar. Graham turned just as Eleanor Whitmore appeared at the corner, dressed in a pristine cream suit that probably cost more than most cars on this block. Her hair was pinned in a chignon so tight it could cut glass, and her lips held a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Well, she said, scanning the modest setup before her with thinly veiled disdain, isn't this quaint? Yasmin's jaw tensed, but she didn't move. Layla instinctively stepped closer to her mother, eyes narrowing. Eleanor addressed Graham without acknowledging either woman. I was wondering where you'd wandered off to. Sterling's team is still waiting, and they're not impressed with tardiness, even from a Whitmore. Graham's voice was low and tight. I told you I needed time. Eleanor's gaze shifted briefly to Yasmin, and her smile soured. Time spent with ghosts doesn't build futures, darling. Yasmin crossed her arms. If I'm a ghost, then you should have no problem leaving me alone. Eleanor turned, now fully facing her. Oh, Yasmin, still so dramatic. I'm not here to start anything. I'm here to offer you a solution. She pulled a slim checkbook from her clutch and held it out like a weapon. Whatever you're holding on to here, this business, this corner, name your price and I'll make it go away. For everyone's sake. Graham looked horrified. Mother, stop! But Yasmin was already laughing, a soft, bitter sound that echoed under the streetlight. You think everything has a price, Eleanor. That's your disease. Eleanor didn't blink. No, my dear, that's realism. And frankly, I thought motherhood might have taught you to be practical. Layla stepped forward now, voice like steel. You don't get to talk to her like that. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, unfazed. And you must be the daughter. I suppose that explains the stubbornness. Yasmin placed a hand on Layla's arm, a silent cue to stand down. She turned to Eleanor. You bought my silence once. You cost my mother her job, you killed my scholarship, and you made sure Graham never came back. But you never bought my soul, and you never will. Eleanor's smile faltered. Don't be foolish. This corner will be gone by the end of the year. Sterling is moving in. You're just a wrinkle in a well-ironed plan. Graham's jaw tightened. Not if I have anything to say about it. Eleanor turned to him, eyes narrowing. And what exactly do you think you're doing, Graham? You think you can turn back time? Rewrite the ending? This isn't a romance novel. Yasmin's voice cut in, calm and clear. No, it's not. It's a life. One I built without your permission. Eleanor stepped back, tucking her checkbook away with a theatrical flick. Very well, but don't come crying when reality crushes your little fairy tale. She walked away, her heels clicking like a closing door behind her. Graham stood there, heart pounding, unsure if he'd just witnessed a confrontation or a declaration of war. Yasmin turned to him once more, eyes harder now. You came back to a different battlefield, Graham, and if you're not ready to bleed a little, then maybe you should walk away again. She returned to her lemonade stand without waiting for a response, while Layla stayed still for a beat, watching him with eyes that said, We've survived without you. Can you survive with us? Graham hadn't said a word since the confrontation. The ride back to Whitmore Tower was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional tap of his assistant's nervous fingers on a tablet. From the passenger seat, he stared at the city unfolding outside his window, but none of it looked familiar anymore. Skyscrapers he'd designed, properties he'd flipped, blocks he'd bulldozed. It all felt hollow, like a shell built around a truth he'd abandoned long ago. Yasmin's words echoed inside him louder than any business report. You came back to a different battlefield. He hadn't expected her fire. He hadn't expected her daughter's steel. And he certainly hadn't expected his own mother to show up and start throwing around checkbooks like threats. But maybe, deep down, he should have known. Eleanor never lost control of a narrative without clawing it back by any means necessary. Inside the boardroom, the air was cooler, more artificial, and laced with anxiety. Executives from Sterling Enterprises waited in their crisp suits, seated at a polished glass table that gleamed under recessed lighting. Graham stepped in, aware of every eye on him. His father, Richard Whitmore, sat at the far end, arms folded, face unreadable. The head of Sterling, a woman named Victoria Langston, sharp as frost and just as cold, stood as he entered. "You're late," she said, voice clipped. Graham unbuttoned his jacket and tossed it over the back of a chair. "I had something more important to deal with." That statement landed like a dropped glass, sharp and jarring. Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Victoria didn't sit. "We're discussing a merger worth $3 billion. You're expected to be focused, not chasing ghosts from your teenage years." He turned to her slowly, letting her words hang between them. "And what exactly do you know about those ghosts?" Victoria's jaw clenched. "I know your mother is worried. I know she's concerned that your recent distractions might compromise the merger. And I know Sterling doesn't enter into partnerships with emotionally unstable CEOs. The room shifted uneasily. Graham laughed, dry and humorless. "Is that what I am now? Emotionally unstable? Because I dared to stop and speak to someone I once cared about?" Richard finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Son, we've worked too hard for too long to let sentiment jeopardize our legacy. Yasmin Carter is the past. What we're building here is the future." Graham stepped forward, his palms pressed to the table. "A future built on what exactly? Corporate greed? Erasing people's homes and families so we can slap our names on another glass tower? What legacy is that?" Victoria exhaled slowly. "This isn't about one woman with a lemonade stand. It's about your role, your reputation, your responsibility to this company." Graham turned to face his father. "And what if I don't want that role anymore? What if I'm tired of wearing this suit of armor that never belonged to me?" Richard's gaze sharpened. "Then you walk away from everything we've built." The words hit like a punch to the chest. For a moment, Graham couldn't breathe. Everything they'd built, it had been the mantra of his life. Late nights, long meetings, endless compromises. But as he stood there, with Yasmin's laughter still echoing somewhere in the back of his memory, and her daughter's piercing eyes reminding him of everything he left behind, he realized something devastating. He hadn't built anything that mattered. He'd inherited it, expanded it, and polished it, but he hadn't felt any of it. "I'm not that boy you sent away anymore," Graham said, voice low but steady. "And I'm not the man you expect me to be either." Richard narrowed his eyes. "So what? You throw away this deal, this company, for a woman who sells lemonade on a street corner?" Graham smiled just barely. "I'd rather build something real with her than keep pretending any of this makes me happy." The boardroom was frozen, breathless. No one moved. Victoria's lips parted in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Graham straightened his back. "Dead serious. This merger isn't happening. Not if it means bulldozing her diner. Not if it means lying to myself for another 15 years. Eleanor's entrance, as always, was perfectly timed. She stormed in through the side door, heels clicking like warning shots, face flushed with indignation. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded, her voice rising before decorum could catch it. "Do you know what this stunt will cost you?" Graham turned to her calmly. "Everything I don't want." She stared at him, stunned. "Do you think she wants you back? After what you did? After what we did?" He looked his mother in the eyes, finally unafraid. "I don't know, but I know I can't live with myself if I don't find out." Victoria slammed her folder shut. "Sterling is out. If you walk away from this, don't expect to crawl back." Graham nodded. "Noted." Richard stood, his voice low and final. "This is a mistake, son. You'll regret it." Graham didn't reply. He didn't need to. He turned and left the room, leaving behind the polished floors, the empty promises, and the heavy nameplate that no longer meant anything to him. In the hallway, the weight began to lift. Not completely, but enough to take a full breath. By the time he reached the street, the sun had started its slow descent behind the buildings. The city moved around him, cars honking, lights blinking, strangers bustling. But all he could think about was a corner where the past still lived, and a woman who never stopped fighting for her truth. Maybe she'd never take him back. Maybe she wouldn't even believe him. But for the first time in his life, Graham Whitmore wasn't thinking about risk or return. He was thinking about choice, and this time, he was choosing with his heart. Graham's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications blinked across the screen like silent alarms. Board members demanding explanations, Sterling's legal team threatening breach of contract, his mother leaving voice messages thick with fury and fear. But none of it registered fully, not since he'd left the boardroom and walked into the light of the city with nothing but clarity on his mind. He had chosen Yasmin, or at least the truth she represented, and that decision came with its consequences. What he didn't expect was how quickly the past would come knocking, not as memories or whispers, but as a man in a sharp suit and a smile too thin to trust. He was standing outside a coffee shop near the park, watching pigeons scatter across cracked pavement, when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened with a soft click, and a man stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks like he had all the time in the world. He looked out of place here, too tailored, too precise, like someone who belonged behind smoked glass and gold-trimmed offices. "Mr. Whitmore?" the man said smoothly. "Joey Morales. I hear you've been asking about me." Graham turned, tension sliding through his spine like ice. "I've been asking about some debts," he replied cautiously, "from someone who's no longer around to pay them." Morales smiled, showing teeth that were far too perfect to be kind. "Debts don't die with the debtor, Mr. Whitmore. They just grow roots, especially the kind taken in desperation, under promises that were never meant to last." Graham stepped forward. "Let's cut the theatrics. How much does Yasmin owe?" Morales tilted his head slightly, amused. "Ah, straight to the heart. I like that. Her late husband, Thomas Carter, borrowed $2 million from me. Most of it under the table, of course. There's interest, time, emotional costs. I'd say it's more like $5 million now, give or take." Graham's jaw tensed. He hated this game. The subtle threats hidden beneath politeness. The way men like Morales twisted desperation into opportunity. "And what exactly are you doing here?" he asked. "Blackmail? Warnings? A courtesy visit?" Morales chuckled. "Consider this a window of grace. I thought you should know what you're getting into before you throw away your fortune chasing fairy tales. She's not who you remember. She's in deep, and she's not being honest with you." Graham narrowed his eyes. "She never asked me for a cent." Morales reached into his coat and produced an envelope, which he handed over with a flourish. "Then maybe you should see what she signed." Graham stared at the envelope in his hands, the weight of it heavier than paper should ever feel. "I don't need her past to love her," he said. Morales smiled again, this time slower, colder. "Maybe, but if you start paying off ghosts without knowing who raised them, you might find yourself haunted too." With that, he turned and slipped back into his car, the door closing with an ominous finality. Graham didn't open the envelope, not yet. He knew whatever lay inside would shift the ground beneath him, and he wasn't ready to look at Yasmin through a stranger's lens. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, unresolved. By the time he reached the diner, dusk had settled in. Lights inside glowed softly and golden, casting long shadows across the booths. The place was almost empty, except for a girl behind the counter, wiping it down with slow, practiced strokes. Layla looked up as the bell above the door rang. She didn't smile. "She's not here," she said plainly. "Went to the bank." Again. Graham nodded, moving toward the counter. "Are they still threatening foreclosure?" Layla's hands stilled and her voice lost its edge. "They won't extend the loan. We're out of options." He sat on the stool, folding his hands. "Why didn't she tell me?" Layla met his eyes, her voice quiet but firm. "Because she's not after your money. Because she spent 15 years handling things alone. And because every time a Whitmore shows up in her life, it ends in damage." Graham didn't respond immediately. The envelope in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole in his chest. He pulled it out and placed it on the counter. "Do you know what this is?" Layla glanced at it but didn't touch it. "I know Morales has a long memory, and I know Dad made some bad decisions trying to give her a better life. She deserves better than this," Graham murmured. Layla's face softened, just slightly. "Then don't just throw money at the fire and call it love. That's what Dad did. It never worked. She needs someone who'll stand beside her even if everything falls apart. Graham picked up the envelope again and stood. Tell her I stopped by. Layla hesitated, then said, she still loves you, even if she doesn't say it. But that love won't survive lies. Outside, the night had fully fallen. Graham walked slowly through the streets, unsure where he was headed. The envelope remained unopened, the weight of it growing heavier with every step. He knew that truth was a necessary risk, but the question clawing at him was far more complicated. Would telling Yasmin the truth mean losing her all over again? Or would hiding it turn him into the very man she'd learned to live without? The past didn't just haunt, it bargained. And tonight, Graham realized, he was the one being asked to pay the price. The diner was almost empty when Sarah returned, her shoulders heavy beneath a soft denim jacket she wore like armor. The visit to the bank had been what she expected. Polite words wrapped around a firm refusal. No extensions, no flexibility, no more chances. As she pushed open the door, the familiar scent of coffee and lemon hung in the air, a bitter-sweet comfort that did nothing to steady her nerves. Layla looked up from behind the counter, where she was refilling the sugar canisters. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw it immediately. Something had happened. He came by, Layla said before her mother could even hang up her jacket. Graham! Sarah froze, halfway to untying her apron. Did he say why? Layla nodded toward the back booth, where an envelope lay sealed and untouched. He left that, said you should see it. Sarah approached slowly, heart pounding harder with each step, and sat down. The envelope was thick, the kind of paper used by men who meant business. For a long moment, she didn't touch it. Then, with trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside were copies of loan agreements, stamped and signed, her signature scrawled in black ink beside Thomas's. She remembered now. The late nights, the papers slid across the kitchen table with rushed explanations, the way Thomas had said it was a bridge loan from a friend. She hadn't asked questions then. She hadn't wanted to. The truth had always been crouched at the door, but she'd kept it closed, too busy raising Layla, too tired to fight ghosts. Now the ghost had stepped inside. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just folded the documents and placed them back in the envelope, then walked behind the counter and poured herself a cup of coffee, letting the warmth steady her hands. Did he say anything else? She asked quietly. Layla hesitated. Only that you never asked him for help, and that he didn't know how deep the debt was. Sarah nodded, eyes far away. I didn't tell him, because I didn't want to be rescued. Not by him. Not by anyone. Layla's voice was gentle. I think he knows that now. The bell above the door rang again, this time softer, less urgent. And when Sarah looked up, Graham stood there. No suit, no tie, just a gray sweater and the same quiet look she remembered from long ago. Their eyes met, and for a second, no one moved. Then Sarah motioned toward the booth. Sit down, she said. He did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic. These were the only sounds between them. Finally, Sarah spoke, voice steady but tired. I saw the papers. Graham nodded. I thought you should. Morales came to me. Tried to use it as leverage. I didn't know what Tom had done. Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. Neither did I. Not really, I wanted to believe him. He wanted to give me the world. Said all the right things. Sounded like you once did. Graham winced at that, but he didn't interrupt. Sarah continued, eyes fixed on her coffee. By the time I realized it wasn't clean money, the walls were already closing in. And then he died, and Morales disappeared, until now. She finally looked up. Why are you here, Graham? Is it guilt? Nostalgia? Or do you think this is something you can fix with a check? Graham leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because I chose you. Not the company, not the merger. You. Sarah shook her head slowly, a sad smile on her lips. You chose an idea of me, Graham, but I'm not 17 anymore. I'm a woman who spent years fighting to keep her head above water, and I can't afford another man who walks away when it gets hard. Graham's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. I'm not walking, not this time. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a smaller envelope, this one addressed to the Reynolds Board of Directors. "I've resigned," he said. "Effective immediately. I've sold my shares. I'm out." Sarah stared at him in stunned silence. "You gave up everything." Graham gave a soft, ironic smile. "It wasn't everything. Not when the only thing that ever really mattered was sitting across from me in a diner I should have never left." Sarah laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was soft, sad, and filled with the weight of too many yesterdays. "You're still good with words," she said, "but words didn't stop Morales, and words won't save this place." Graham nodded. "Then let's start with actions." He leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let me help, not with a blank check, not with favors. Let me stand beside you, shoulder to shoulder. We'll find a real solution. Legal, honest, something that keeps your name on the deed." Sarah studied him for a long moment. Her instincts still screamed caution, but something in his face, something stripped of wealth and power, reached her. He looked like the boy she once trusted, and the man he never had the chance to become. "You want to be part of this life," she said. "Then you do it on my terms. No secrets, no shortcuts. And you have to listen, even when it's messy." Graham nodded with no hesitation. "Deal." She extended her hand across the table. "Then let's see if we can fix what's broken. Together." He took her hand, and for the first time in 15 years, something shifted between them. Not a clean slate, not a fairy tale, but a beginning, rough-edged and real. Outside, the city rolled on. Inside, the diner glowed with something warmer than light, something closer to hope. Morning broke with a kind of fragile brightness, as though the sky itself wasn't sure whether to trust the day. Inside the diner, Sarah moved with practiced grace, refilling creamers, wiping down the counter, and folding napkins with her usual precision. But her mind was far from the breakfast rush. The envelope Graham had left last night still sat on her office desk, heavy with finality. His resignation, his declaration, his sacrifice. She had read it 3 times, once aloud, once in silence, and once through a blur of tears she hadn't meant to shed. The words weren't romantic, they were resolute, but she still didn't know whether to call them brave or foolish. The bell above the door rang, and for once Sarah didn't look up. She didn't need to. The footsteps were slow and steady, the kind of gait that belonged to someone used to owning every room he entered. Graham slid into the booth across from her without saying a word. His hair was slightly tousled, his shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and the dark circles beneath his eyes said everything his voice didn't. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who had burned down the only world he'd ever known, and was now waiting to see what rose from the ash. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking, and he took it without thanks. Not because he wasn't grateful, but because they both understood that this wasn't a moment for pleasantries. It was a moment for reckoning. "They're going to come after you," Sarah said finally, breaking the quiet. "Your board, your family, Sterling. They won't let you go without punishment." Graham nodded, his fingers wrapped around the coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "They already are. I've had 5 calls from lawyers and 3 from Victoria Langston. My mother's probably mobilizing the cavalry as we speak." Sarah met his eyes. "And you're still sure?" Graham didn't hesitate. "Yes, I built that empire, but it was never mine. It was theirs, their rules, their image, their version of success. I was just the front man." He took a slow breath. "But here, with you, I feel like I can finally build something real, something worth bleeding for." She said nothing for a moment, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "This is for the office. If you're going to be part of this, you might as well start where it matters." Graham took it, holding it like a sacred thing. The front door opened again, this time with force, and Layla walked in, her eyes sharp and urgent. "He's here," she said, her voice low and tense. "Morales, outside." Sarah stood instantly, and Graham followed her lead. When they stepped out onto the sidewalk, Joey Morales leaned against his sleek black car, a cigarette dangling from his fingers, and a smirk already plastered on his face. "I see the lovebirds are playing house now," he said smoothly. "How sweet," Graham stepped forward. "We're done playing games. You'll get your money, legally, cleanly through proper channels. But the threats stopped today. Morales blew smoke into the air, his tone amused. You don't get to dictate terms, Whitmore. Your little performance might have won her heart, but I own her history. And if I want, I can make sure this diner goes down in flames. Metaphorically, of course. Sarah stepped beside Graham, her voice calm and clear. Then go ahead, burn it. But we'll still be standing when the smoke clears. You fed on fear long enough. It ends here. Morales studied them both, the smirk slipping just slightly. You've changed, he muttered, mostly to himself. Used to be you'd cry when I raised my voice. I don't cry anymore, Sarah said, her voice like iron. And I don't run either. Morales flicked his cigarette into the street, then climbed into his car. You've made powerful enemies, he warned. Be careful who you trust. And with that, he drove off, leaving the street oddly still behind him. Graham exhaled slowly, the tension leaking out of his frame like air from a punctured tire. Sarah turned to him. That's not over, he nodded. But we've taken the first step, and I'll be here for the rest of them. Later that afternoon, as they prepared for the lunch crowd, the door opened yet again, this time revealing Eleanor Whitmore, dressed to kill and surrounded by two lawyers in charcoal gray suits. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. She simply handed Sarah a thick envelope and said, if you sign this, we make all of this go away. The debt, the diner, the headlines. You walk away with a generous settlement and your dignity intact. Sarah opened the envelope, scanned the terms, and placed it neatly back on the counter. My dignity isn't something you can package and price. Eleanor's voice dropped to a warning whisper. You're risking everything. For what? Love? Nostalgia? He'll come to his senses eventually, and when he does, you'll be the one left behind. Graham stepped forward. No, Mother. You've spent your whole life confusing control with love. But this is what love looks like. Eleanor turned her gaze on him, fury barely concealed. You've thrown away $1 billion future for this. Graham smiled. No, I finally chose a future worth living. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, then flicked to Sarah. You'll regret this. Sarah met her gaze unflinchingly. Not if I stay true to myself. With a dramatic flourish, Eleanor stormed out, her entourage trailing behind like shadows. The diner remained silent for a long beat before Layla finally said, Well, that was dramatic. Sarah chuckled under her breath. She always did like an audience. Graham turned to her, eyes steady. You okay? She nodded. I'm tired, but not afraid. As the sun dipped lower, casting warm light through the windows, Graham reached across the counter and took Sarah's hand. Then let's finish what we started. Outside, the empire he left behind began to stir with chaos. But inside the diner, something stronger was being built. Something not made of concrete and steel, but of honesty, defiance, and the kind of love that could survive fire. The boardroom at Whitmore Holdings had never felt colder. The floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with sterile morning light, but it couldn't chase away the tension that wrapped itself around every executive seated at the massive walnut table. On the screen at the head of the room, stock charts pulsed with urgent red, while news headlines ticked across the bottom. Whitmore-Sterling merger in jeopardy. Sources cite CEO's personal crisis. Murmurs passed between stiff-suited men and women, their gazes flicking toward the empty chair at the head of the table, like it might spontaneously catch fire. Then, without warning, the door opened, and in walked Graham Whitmore, not in a suit, not with a smile, but with a quiet fire behind his eyes that silenced the room in seconds. Behind him trailed his father, Richard Whitmore, older and more weathered than ever, his usual polished demeanor cracked at the edges. As Graham approached his seat, Victoria Langston, the Sterling CEO, stood with the practiced poise of a woman used to controlling every narrative. Her voice was like silk over a blade. You're late, and unless you've come to save this deal, I suggest you sit and listen. Graham didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, both hands pressed against the polished wood like a man bracing for impact. There is no deal, he said clearly. Not with Sterling. Not anymore. A collective intake of breath followed, like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Victoria narrowed her eyes. You don't have that authority, not unilaterally. Graham turned to the board, sweeping his gaze across their stunned faces. No, I don't, but I gave up my authority the moment I chose to stand for something other than power, and you all deserve to know why. From the folder tucked beneath his arm, he pulled out a series of documents and began laying them out across the table. Loan records, development plans, internal memos, all of them tied to backroom deals, unethical land grabs, and off-the-books money that propped up the Reynolds-Sterling merger. For years, Graham continued, this company has been complicit in silencing communities and manipulating public records to build a legacy of glass and deception. This isn't about love or nostalgia. This is about truth. Eleanor Whitmore, seated at the far end, stiffened. You're trying to destroy us, she said quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. You're willing to burn down your family's name for a woman who sells lemonade. Graham looked directly at her. I'm not burning it down. I'm airing it out. And maybe if you had done that a long time ago, we wouldn't be sitting in a tower built on buried stories and dirty money. Richard finally spoke, his voice dry and worn but clear. He's right. I've known it for a while now. We thought we were protecting a legacy, but we were just building a cage. It ends today. Victoria slammed a palm on the table. This is a hostile maneuver. Sterling will sue. Your father will be indicted. You'll lose everything. Graham didn't flinch. Then sue us. Let the world watch. Let the press ask why your perfect empire needs to partner with corruption to stay afloat. Victoria's expression cracked, if only for a second. You smug little fool. You think love can save you? Graham shook his head. No, but it made me brave enough to stop lying. That's more than I can say for you. He turned back to the board. Vote now, not on the merger, on whether this company wants to survive in the light or die in the shadows. The room fell into a heavy, electric silence. Then slowly, one by one, hands went up. Richard first, then an executive from legal, then another, and another. The vote was unanimous. The merger was dead. Sterling was out. Eleanor stood slowly, trembling. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You've destroyed us. Graham looked at her, not with triumph, but with sorrow. No, I just stopped pretending we were whole. Victoria grabbed her briefcase, her heels clicking furiously as she stormed out, already dialing someone with power. Eleanor followed, her face pale with disbelief, her world unspooling faster than she could hold it together. And in that quiet aftermath, Graham turned to his father. Thank you, he said softly. Richard nodded, eyes misty. You did what I couldn't. You told the truth. Back at the diner, the midday sun bathed the windows in gold. Sarah was wiping down a table when the news alert flashed across the small TV above the counter. Whitmore Holdings rejects Sterling merger in stunning vote. CEO cites ethical reform and transparency. Customers whispered among themselves. Layla read the headline twice, then looked at her mother. He did it, she said. He did it. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. Now we find out what it costs. An hour later, the door opened, and Graham walked in, still carrying the weight of the boardroom on his shoulders, but with his gaze fixed only on Sarah. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over, took his hand and held it. So? She asked. He exhaled. It's done. We told the truth. We let it burn. Sarah smiled faintly. And what rises from the ashes? Graham looked around the diner, at Layla refilling a glass of tea, at customers laughing in booths, at a corner built on struggle and strength. Something real, he said. Something that finally belongs to us. Outside, the reporters were gathering, their cameras trained on the man who chose truth over empire. But inside, Sarah poured 2 cups of lemonade, slid one toward him, and whispered, "Welcome home." And in that moment, with nothing left to prove, Graham finally understood what it meant to win. The scent of fresh lemons filled the early morning air, mingling with the buttery sweetness of pie crust baking in the oven. Outside the diner, sunlight spilled across the sidewalk, kissing the edges of the rebuilt lemonade stand, a permanent structure now, with copper trim that caught the light like a crown. The old hand-painted sign had been restored and framed. Yasmin's Lemonade, still the best in town. Inside, the booths were polished, the tables adorned with simple white flowers, and every surface gleamed with the kind of care only love could polish. But the hum of preparation wasn't for a lunch crowd. Today, the diner was closed to the public. Today, it belonged to something older than business and far more sacred than strategy. Today was a vow, 15 years in the making. Sarah stood in the back room before a mirror, smoothing down her cream-colored dress, not extravagant, not flashy, just perfect. It clung to her in the right places and draped with a quiet dignity, just like she lived. Around her neck hung a gold locket, inside it a photo of Thomas holding baby Layla, a reminder of all the roads that had led her here. Her reflection held 1,000 yesterdays, but in her eyes was only one thing: peace. A soft knock at the door drew her from the moment. Layla peeked in, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, lemon blossoms tucked between the stems. "It's time," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. Sarah nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand before stepping into the light. Across the street in the park, guests had gathered in folding chairs beneath an arch wrapped in vines and pale yellow roses. The air buzzed with quiet excitement, the kind that only true stories bring. Regulars from the diner sat shoulder to shoulder with former board members, who had returned not in suits but in shirt sleeves and smiles. And at the center of it all stood Graham, in a tailored gray suit that looked nothing like his old life. Unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled just enough to show he'd stopped caring about appearances and started living from the inside out. When Sarah stepped onto the path, every head turned. But Graham didn't just look. He saw her. The way her hair framed her face, the curve of her smile, the strength in every step. Richard stood beside him, proud and steady, no longer the architect of dynasties, but a man finally learning how to be a father. Eleanor sat in the third row, dressed in navy blue, her posture softer, her eyes glistening with something dangerously close to remorse. And when Sarah reached Graham, he took both her hands in his, and for a moment the world quieted. The officiant began, but no one remembered the exact words. What mattered came next. The vows were not rehearsed. They lived. Graham's voice was low, but it carried. "I spent years chasing towers of glass and steel, thinking I could fill the silence inside me with success. But it was always you. From the first sip of lemonade to the last night I saw you smile, it was always you. I left because I was afraid of losing everything. I came back because I finally realized you were everything. You believed in me before I believed in myself. And now I vow to believe in you, every day, for the rest of our lives." Sarah's eyes shimmered, but her voice never trembled. "You didn't come back to rescue me, Graham. I didn't need saving. I needed someone who would walk beside me, even when the road cracked beneath us. And that's who you've become. I vow not to hold your past against you, as long as you meet me in the present. I vow to let go of what hurts and hold on to what heals. I vow to love you, even when it's messy, even when the world doubts us, especially then." The crowd rose in applause as they kissed, a simple, real kiss that tasted like sunlight and second chances. Layla was the first to run up and hug them, laughing through her tears. She whispered something in Graham's ear that made him laugh, and whatever wall had stood between them all these years seemed to crack, just enough to let in something warm. The reception flowed back into the diner, transformed for the occasion with fairy lights and pie stations. Graham rolled up his sleeves and helped pour lemonade behind the counter, while Sarah pinned her apron back over her dress with pride. Guests snapped pictures, laughed out loud, and danced to old R&B hits played through the diner's ancient jukebox. The lemonade flowed, not just in glasses, but in stories of resilience, of grief, of choosing again. Richard brought out a pie he had baked himself, lopsided, barely holding together, and proudly declared it his first successful crust. Eleanor, for once, didn't correct him. Instead, she handed envelopes to Graham and Layla, the trust she had set aside years ago, but had never dared to deliver. And for the first time in her life, Sarah placed a hand gently on her former enemy's arm and said, "Maybe it's time you stopped watching from the outside." As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the floor, Sarah and Graham slipped out to the lemonade stand. She poured 2 cups, handed him one, and leaned against the counter. "You want to know a secret?" she said. "That very first day I added extra sugar. I thought you were cute and wanted you to come back. Graham laughed, the sound low and full of awe. Want to know my secret? I hated lemonade back then, but I kept drinking it because it tasted like you. They touched cups, took a sip, and let the silence hold them. Not as a pause, but as a promise. Life had taken the long way around, but it had brought them home, not to the past, but to the present they had built, one bittersweet cup at a time. The copper roof of the stand gleamed as the first stars emerged above Atlanta, and in the soft hush of dusk, a vow was made, not just to love, but to keep choosing it every single day. And this time, no one would walk away. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of love, redemption, and second chances. What did this story stir in you? Have you ever had to choose between heart and legacy? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections matter more than you know. If this story moved you, don't forget to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And of course, subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that speaks to the soul. Until next time, take care and remember sometimes the sweetest things in life are poured from the simplest cups. See you soon.